here. This is perfect. This is a Yang data model question. Which two items are found in Yang data models? Choose two. HTTP return codes, RPC statements, container statements, JSON schema, or XML schema.
Can you repeat the question so I can Google the
Which
answer? Hello and welcome everybody to the American Soccer Analysis Show. I am joined by Harrison Homie Crow and Benjamin Benito Suarez Bellman. Gentlemen, how are we doing on this fine Copa America day?
Melting. Make it
Is it hot?
stop.
Is it hot in Colorado?
The heat dome's back. Yeah.
the heat
Make it
dome.
stop.
How
Uh,
hot is hot? Because I know everybody has
Uh,
varying
it
like.
was 90 degrees before noon in June,
Oh,
which is
Por Dios.
insane.
and you guys got lots of humidity, right?
No, but
Oh no, okay, that's good.
usually it like cools down at night and in the morning. So to be
That's cool.
90 degrees before noon it's too much.
Yeah, for reals, for reals. It's like 82 here today, and yeah, like I
Oof.
went for a walk, and like I have a black t-shirt on, and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna burn.
Oh, you're gonna melt
I'm
too.
too white.
We had the second rainy day since I moved to Nevada. Nevada. In 4 months, it has rained two times.
How much did it flood?
Like not at all. Like
Oh, that's good.
it rained for 20 minutes and we've had cloud cover, so that's a rainy day here.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was today. All right, let's get into it, gentlemen. So there has been a lot going on in North American soccer. The NWSL side has been just bonkers this week.
Lit.
Yeah, lit, but also crazy. So if you want to see more of that, hear more of that, go check out the expected own goals episodes that are dropping on your feed. They're also dropping an extra episode Thursdays on their own feed. They dropped one today talking about the craziness with coaches and GMs leaving. But we're also seeing the same thing in MLS. We've seen a string of coaches being fired. And we also saw today Brian Bliss, is that his name?
Yeah.
The was the technical director, I believe was his official title. Left Sporting Kansas City. Um, Peter Vermes said in a press conference today, kind of hinted that they would be appointing a GM type, GMTD type. Um, and I think, given the things we've talked about at this podcast in the past about like what makes successful soccer teams and what makes successful soccer clubs, I think this is a really fun thing to talk about because, and it's not fun for SKC fans, but like, how many SKC fans are there? It's fun to talk about because at one point SKC were like a cutting edge franchise in MLS. Um, at one point, like SKC were one of the first clubs to have a data person. If you go far enough back, SKC were one of the
Yeah.
first clubs to have a data person in Rui. I can't remember his last name, who went
Yeah,
on to be like a politician,
Rougeau. Yeah, who's now it's like what is I think he's a state senator or
something like that.
yeah.
Or a congressman, I don't know, something like that. But they were one of the first clubs to have a dedicated data person. And what has happened over the years is that Peter Vermes has slowly and slowly taken on more and more organizational import. He's kind of runs everything with that club. That club is Peter Vermes now. And I think we have a line in the tier list about how like Peter Vermes is an analytics expert or something because he actually said that. And I think the thing that has kind of happened, and we've seen this elsewhere, like we saw this with Manchester United post Alex Ferguson, is that one person cannot run a club anymore. And Ben, like, I'd be curious your insight on this. Like, there are so many departments that are involved with running a Major League Soccer team. Even if you're not the best of the best of the best, like, talk to me about how those like roles not work together, but like Talk to
Mhm.
me about that interaction between all the different departments and that kind of thing, because I think from the outside, it's like very easy to be like, get good players, coach team.
Mhm. Yeah. So I mean, I mean, if you really want to get to the full pipeline, there's the academy. But I mean, I don't think we hear much about Sporting's academy these days. So I won't get into those weeds. I think you have to start with the scouting department, and I imagine they have a robust one. Like most MLS clubs, I would assume have 2 to 3 full-time scouts, and then networks of contacts around the world, whether that's through word of mouth, through personal contacts and networks, colleagues, that sort of thing, or whether you're going through your official Red Bull or City Football Group network, that sort of thing. So I think that's a lot of the player finding is probably happening through those people. If you have an advanced analytics department where you have like a sort of roster of players around the world that you can search through, and you have your own way of sifting through that data, I think that will be a like the sort of counterpart to that. So you're providing them, the scouts, with the list of players. Not everything's going to be in your analytics list, but it's going to be a sort of supplemental thing to, okay, here's something here's a player we should be looking at specifically in this league. Let's pull footage on them, versus who are we hearing about? What are the specific beats that we're trying to establish? Like, I know the Rapids for a few years back when they first had oh God, who was that left back's name? Estevez. They had been specifically developing contacts in Brazil, and that's how they were able to sign Rafa Navajo, et cetera, et cetera. So I imagine Sporting has things like that. Where I'm curious is like what the decision process is for who gets signed, who is up for boardroom votes, and who is in the boardroom voting.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think this comes back to something, Harrison, you said last week in relation to Seattle's processes and the president who is now at Atlanta, whose name is,
Garth.
thank you, Garth Lagerwey, who has left my brain. Um, like the point you made last week was Garth Lagerwey is not the one actively scouting players. Like that's not what he does because he's very busy doing other things. To take it the other side of the chain, what time does Peter Vermes, as an MLS head coach, who is running training every single day and is talking to the players and is prepping for matches and opponents and reviewing the previous matches and opponents, at what time does he have to watch a full game of anybody? What time does he have to log on to Y Scout and and find players? And so, okay, he has scouts, and maybe the scouts are sending him like shortened clip packages or whatever, or like here's my list of these players. But like it is basically impossible to make good recruitment decisions if it's not your full-time gig. It's not possible. So Harrison, like from your point of view, like how do you reconcile those two things?
The idea of not having enough time and not having enough people.
Yeah, like well, I like
I mean,
the
you don't reconcile. I mean, you kind of you like look at one point in time, you're still in Peter to pay Paul, right? I guess that's the terminology. And so you don't do one of those things. And I think with SKC at this point in time, they don't have a budget to go out and go get a bunch of stuff, go get, hidden player A and hidden player B that's down in Brazil that we're going to spend, 1.2 million on here and then 1.3 million dollars here, and it's going to be under, the TAM so that we can go ahead and or under the designated player mark so we can TAM their payroll and stuff. They're not doing that stuff. They don't have the time for it, and you can tell, right? That's stuff that those are advanced things that, like, look, unless you're specifically looking at budgets and you're looking at stuff, and not to say that Peter Vermes is incapable of doing any of those things. I'm sure he's a smart guy. He's like honestly, like we were texting this morning, right? I've always thought Peter Vermes was a pretty smart dude, but he just needs someone to get out, like he's someone to tell him to get out of his own way because he wants so much control. And I don't know if it's that he just doesn't trust anybody or he hasn't found somebody that has that same level of thinking that he can say, hey, since we're simpatico, since we have the idea of how we want to play together, this is how we're going to do this is how we're going to structure our team, because he
I,
doesn't have that. I mean, at what, you know, he just hasn't let go of things and let go and let whoever they end up hiring.
I love a good simpatico reference. I think there's two things to talk about here in terms of like Peter Vermes letting go. Generally, managers who are like good, and I think there is no discussion like that at one point Peter Vermes was a very good coach. Like the OG SKC teams were really good. They played really good soccer. They played soccer that like scales to the modern era pretty well. They were good with the ball. They had a good press. Like they had players who could play in different ways. They could play a three, they could play a four. He was like one of the he was like fair to say like ahead of the curve with the like let's turn midfielders into fullbacks things with Graham Zusi.
I mean, he was the only coach to win an MLS Cup during the Galacticos era, during Bruce and Landon and Beckham and Robbie Keane. Like that's an immense achievement.
Yes, like I think nobody is doubting that Vermes is a good coach. And I think there are two, or was a good coach at least. I think there are two kind of pathways for those people, right? One is you move on to better jobs than the club you're at. The problem for him and for guys like Bruce and for guys like Bob Bradley and for guys like in that era is that there was nowhere for you to go as an American. The only job that was bigger than an MLS job was the men's national team, which like there have been rumors forever about Peter Vermes taking the men's national team. Like that was a thing in the early 2010s. And because you're American, like there's just not going to be many opportunities in Europe unless you're
Mhm.
someone like Jesse Marsh who does the whole like Red Bull pyramid thing to get up and up and up. And again, Jesse Marsh has come back to taking a CONCACAF national team job. Like ultimately, those are kind of where you go. The other option, if you're not going to move to a better job, is you accrue power at the club you are at. So you are like, well, I want more money. So they give you more money. And then you want more money. And they're like, okay, we're not giving you more money. You're the highest paid coach in the league. So you want control. And we saw this with Greg Vanney. This is why Greg Vanney left Toronto was Bez left. Ali Curtis came in. Ali Curtis was not very good at his job in Toronto. And Vanney was like, okay, I want a raise and I want to be the GM. And TFC were like, no. And the Galaxy was like, sure thing. And it doesn't work. It's not a
Mhm.
successful model in this league. It's not possible anymore. But you understand why it's to bring Peter back, but a different Peter this time. It's a bit of a Peter principle. Like you are good at what you're doing, so we give you more, and then you're good at what you're doing. Now we make you the technical director. You're in charge of the academy direction as well. Oh, okay, like Gianluca Busio comes through, and like all these good SKC2 kids come through, and like, okay, all right, now you're the GM. You're in charge of all recruitment, and now all of a sudden, all the plates stop spinning.
Well, so I have a question with that. If going abroad's not an option and what you're trying to do is entrench yourself within a club and grow within power and within, scope, uh, how do you do that? And how do you give that as an organization that is in successful paradigm with the way that the league is, not just the league, but all of soccer is shifting towards having more people and more individuals available to do that work?
Ben, I'd be curious. I have an answer to this, but Ben, I want to hear what you say first because I'm very curious how Colorado, for example, how did Colorado approach coach development? I'm going to frame that question first, and then I'll answer.
I actually can't speak to that necessarily, but I do think that you can see that they've invested in their assistants at least. So they like, oh gosh, what's his name? Sharpie. I forget his first name, but whoever took over, no, whoever took over as interim after Robin left, he is still part of Chris Armas's staff. So it like Connor Casey for many years was an assistant before he took the interim job after um the
Chris Little.
yes, Chris Little, thank you. Um after Hudson left. So like you there's it's clear that at least in terms of their assistant coaching staff, they're not thinking of it as a revolving door for whoever they're trying to bring in. Like there's an actual institutional knowledge happening with who they have in their locker room. That I think that was probably a key reason as to why they hired Armas was his willingness to come in to work within that ethos. Say like, okay, actually there's a fit here. I don't need to bring in a bunch of my friends because a lot of what I want to be doing already seems to be in place organizationally.
Yeah, that was a big strong point for Armis in Toronto as well, was that he like didn't bring a bunch of Red Bull guys with him. He hired like Ian Russell from San Jose came to be his assistant here. Jesus Perez, who came from New York City. They were a lot of new guys that TFC wanted to keep was the appeal. Because when Vanny left, the whole staff left with him to LA. The reason I asked that question is because Harrison, I think the answer for clubs is like you just don't do it. And if they reach a point where they're willing to walk, like I think you're just willing to pay them more money. But I think at some point you just say, okay, then walk. And you have the processes in place as a club where like you are developing Seattle Sounders coaches or Sporting Kansas City coaches. You are not, it's not Vermes' assistants. It is your coaches. And I think like in SKC's defense, like they have actually grown quite a few coaches through the club. Like Benny Feilhaber is, by all accounts, like a very good coach with SKC2. SKC2 have been very successful. Ike Opara is an assistant
Ike
there.
Oparos. I was waiting for that one. Yeah.
They had his name Paulo Nagamura is an MLS assistant. I can't remember where now, but was formerly the SKC2 head coach. The SKC2 goalkeeper coach is a former SKC2 player. Like that's Darren McLeod. Him and I played together when we were teenagers. Shout out there. Ben, shoot.
So I think this gives me a question, which is what's happening right now? Like, is this a coaching problem or is this a roster problem? Because I feel like even in the past few years, SKC haven't been bad. Their recruitment hasn't necessarily been bad. Like Johnny Russell has been a great player. Daniel Shalway's been a great player. But then I think of like Alan Polito, and like that was supposed to be this big DP money signing. Injuries withstanding, I'm looking at his statistical production, throughout his career in Mexico. His goals aren't jumping off the charts at any point in his career. You look at his XG, going back to like FBref has his XG starting from Chivas in 2018, 2019. He's never like lighting it up on XG either. So clearly, I don't think there's much data scouting going into this decision. I think this is more of a big name, a marketing. Let's draw some eyeballs. Let's try and get a big forward.
Yes,
Is that
yes.
because? Go
But
ahead.
my counter with that is that they've never they've never had a guy that generates a ton of XG either. And that's kind of because they do that counter pressing so much. I think a lot of their goals that they score are probably there's probably a it probably doesn't sync up, right? And that would be my theory just offhand is that their XG is probably a lot lower intrinsically over the career of Peter Vermes than the goals that they've actually scored because of that counter press, because of how they've chosen to play. And so trying to find somebody that fits into that model, that would be my only counter to that. But I think that that's an apt point, Ben.
Just on SKC historically, like they don't really stand out as a super low XG team. Like they're not prolific by any means, but they're like fairly normal in terms of non-penalty XG per 90. The point you do make is like it has never been a striker. It has very much been Shallowy and Johnny Russell and wingers. Like
Yeah.
it has not been strikers. That is very Christian Nemeth. Like it's that part is
Mm-hmm.
very much true. Johan Quase, if you remember him,
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Ramzusi.
Yeah,
at times.
it's been wide players more than it
Mhm.
has been strikers. Um, in terms of is this a coaching thing or is this a talent thing? Like I am fairly inclined to say it's a talent thing. Um, G Plus has like really disliked them over the last couple of years. G Plus really likes Andreu Fontas because he's a center back who just moves the chains, he just moves the ball forward, but he can't defend, and it can't see that he can't defend. Um, and it really likes Agata, the striker, who's like, but it likes Agata because he like gets tons of receiving value, but then he does nothing with it. So it's like he's kind of weird. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of players I really like. And I think one of the things that is very difficult for them that they've done a particularly poor job of is that the best SKC teams were really old. You had Zusi was a significant contributor. Um, you had Espinoza, you had Tamilia, who like Tamilia is like not very good anymore. That's like a problem for your team. Um, and like the last time SKC were really good was like 2020. They were like fifth. 20, I think 2021 they were fourth, but that was the shortened season. And that team is like a lot of older guys, like Russell's 29, Zusi's 33, Ilie, Roger Espinoza, Polito, who's like not that old yet. Matt Beasler is still playing. Like they're older, but they were dotted with young guys, Jalen Lindsay, Gianluca Busio, Felipe Hernandez. Like they were like dudes. And if you look at the team now, they're a lot younger than those teams, but like the young players aren't that good. And it's like just not, there's just not that much talent. There's nobody on SKC that like, we're going to talk about trades later. There's nobody on SKC
Mhm.
that I'm like, I really want that guy.
Mhm.
I would counter with that's because it's an organizational, and really this is where I would put it back on Peter Vermes. He's done a really bad job, and I don't necessarily think he's done a bad job with SKC2, but Swoop Park or SPR or whatever you want to call it now. Um, yeah, those players haven't made that jump. And I don't necessarily put that on him. I think that's a talent problem. But with that, I think that there's an individual structural problem because Kansas City has done really nothing with the young players that they've got. They've got some really talented players. I mean, look at Eric Palmer Brown that they just never were able to, integrate. They've got some talented players, but I feel like that developmental part of SKC that you would think a general manager or maybe a vice president or whoever else is involved. I mean, you look at Garth Lagerway again, and I talked about it last podcast. That's his legacy in Seattle. That will be his legacy in Seattle, what he left behind. I think it's one of the big things that Atlanta is going to start reaping in about 5 years, which is going to be entirely scary to me to think about. I think that that's where you lay it at his feet and say you've done nothing while you had years to build this up. And again, they were one of the first teams that were going out there and they were signing players in no man's land that didn't have MLS
Well, that's
restrictions.
that's that's Busio. Busio's a North Carolina kid,
Right,
right?
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
I was gonna say, yeah, I was thinking
So
that just too. Yeah.
so they've gone and they've done this type of stuff. They've been ahead in thinking of this, but they don't have any, they haven't had any infrastructure. And maybe that's, okay, he didn't have his guys and now he does, there at SPR. And maybe over the next couple of years, you'll start seeing a better infrastructure and pipeline from the second team to the first team. But that in and of itself, I mean, I feel like that's where you can point at SKC and say, this is why you failed over the course of the last 6 years. You haven't been able to backfill any of these players that got old and retired. You
Hmm.
can't you can't do that. I mean, if you look at all the teams that had from 2018 to 2024 and that they've sustained any amount of success, it's that they've been able to reload and they've been able to reload semi-successfully. I mean, Atlanta hasn't been able to do it, right? The Galaxy haven't been able to do it. Galaxy have just basically faltered and gone through rebuild after rebuild. They're starting to get through that. But I
The
mean,
the only
again,
the only two teams who have like consistently kept their team good for like more than 2 or 3 years are Philadelphia and LAFC.
Well, now
And
Philly's
and
even.
Seattle.
I,
And
I would
Seattle.
Seattle,
And Seattle.
But even
Mm,
Seattle's stumbled, right? Like
Well,
Seattle's
Seattle do the thing where like they have a terrible half season and then they pick up the second half. But even then, like they win CCL and then miss the playoffs. Like,
right.
but
And
but
part of
Seattle,
that
I
would
think if you zoom out like over 10 years, like it's hard to say anyone has had a better 10 year stretch than Seattle has.
yeah,
yeah.
and I know that, and I think listeners get tired of hearing Seattle, but really, I like to focus in on the fact that LAFC and Philadelphia have done this too, and they've done it two different ways, and I think that's what makes them interesting, right? Is they have had their success in refilling and backfilling those positions, in a
Hmm.
really, really unique way, each of them.
Yeah, I feel like Philly's so strong with the academy. Where they're faltering now is the actual signing of talent from other leagues to supplement those, like getting the dudes to help the kids. Whereas LAFC, they have kids, but they're signing their kids from all over the world through their robust scouting network and their player evaluation and that sort of thing. Harrison, I'm really glad you mentioned the North Carolina connection to the SKC Academy and why I feel like the SKC Academy had a reputation, but the reputation was for recruiting. Whereas, Philly and Dallas and RSL, their academy kids are from their
Mhm.
catchment zone and they develop them. And SKC's academy for the longest time, they were targeting the North Carolinas and those parts of the country where there wasn't an MLS team at the time, and they could go and recruit those teams because they didn't have that local competition.
Wasn't
I'm
wasn't who was the striker from Arizona as well?
oh,
Um, I'm thinking of Matthew Hoppy, but he wasn't an SKC thing. I thought he was. Never mind. Sorry,
I
continue.
mean, there's all sorts of weird MLS recruiting, American soccer recruiting stuff. But you know what I mean? Like I feel like
Mhm.
their talent was because they were able to sell a good pitch, like a college recruiting program, and not necessarily coach up the kids that they have within their area, which population wise might be a little smaller, but I think there's probably plenty of talented kids in the Sporting KC metro area or in the Kansas City metro area. So I wonder if that strategy has lost its shine now that Charlotte's there, sort of in the way a little bit with their discovery, however that discovery list works. Maybe kids are less willing to move across the country now. Maybe the shine on the club has worn off now that there's other shinier new toys in the league compared to 2015 when Orlando was the shiny new toy. So I mentioned this in the chat. Peter is the constant from my fandom. Like I started in 2011 and he was already the coach of Sporting Kansas City. They had just rebranded and here we are 14 years later and he's the one coach still left. It's he's going to have to adapt or he's going to have to bring in people to help him adapt or I don't know how well this is going to keep going.
The striker I was thinking about was Josh Sargent, who was like at SKC and got a homegrown offer and then dipped to go to Bremen. So I got the wrong prospect to the Bundesliga. Regardless, I think the point you made, Harrison, is really good in that like it's less about like what they've produced and more about like how they've used what they've produced, if that makes sense. Like
Mhm.
the things that like Philly have done really well and that the crew are doing really well right now is that like the players coming through their academy are supplementing the talent they have, and then when the talent they have is good enough, or the players coming up are good enough, they move on the excess wages in the older players to let those players grow now. Where like Jalen Lindsay now is like a somewhat mid player for Charlotte, but like he was playing real minutes for SKC at 17. Like what happens if you decide to move on from, I don't know, one of your older players to give him more time, to give him space to be more than what he's ended up being? Like that's, I don't know. And it's hard to say when you're winning in the moment. Like I'm never going to begrudge any team making a decision because they're winning now. But I think sometimes like in the longer term, you have to make different decisions. And this brings it back to like the whole point of the roles of coach and GM and head of recruitment is that like coaches' incentives are inherently short term. If your coach is thinking about anything other than like winning the next game, and maybe your coach should be thinking like how do I maximize win probability over the season? Probably should be thinking, how do I maximize wins over the season? Your coach cannot really be thinking about like, well, what about next season? What about the season after that? Like that's not a thing that can happen. And it's very difficult to balance those priorities. It's very, very difficult. And so I think decoupling those roles is the most sensible. I wanted to get into this in the topic of other teams because we've been talking a lot about like what does it mean to be good? What does it mean to be what does it mean for a player to be good? And I mentioned a quote to Harrison that you really liked about like 10% of players are good enough that they'll be good anywhere. 10% of players are bad enough they'll be bad anywhere. And the middle 80% that all matters about where you are.
I want to be best friends with that person that came up with that.
I don't know who said
That's
it.
smart.
If you know, you should tell us. But I think in MLS that's especially true when you have like a fairly dense cohort of talent in the league. Where we see this all the time with players who like leave to another club for another role. And I emphasize role because a lot of times it's like what a player does is different club to club, that like fit matters a lot. Griffin Dorsey like couldn't get on the field in Toronto as like a bad winger. And he goes to Houston and is a very good fullback. Richie Larea was like
Benny Ball.
released. Yeah, Benny Ball. Richie Larea was released from Orlando as an attacking midfielder who didn't score goals to coming into camp at TFC like as a literally as a training player to being a DP right back 3 or 4 years later. Like these players are what they do. They aren't their position. They are what they do and where they do it. And so I think when we're talking about like good organizations, it's like how can you bring that out?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about it. We've talked about it kind of this week in terms of how do you identify and segment um, production, and then also what a player kind of instinctively does on the field, right? Uh, Christian Roldan is one of the individuals that we kind of, I think, kind of started this conversation, and that was, with what he's been doing year over year, playing right wing or playing in the center midfield, and this year now he's playing like right wing, right fullback, because the other Roldan, his brother, has been in concussion, in those orders. So they've been, very careful with Alex Roldan. So Christian Roldan slides back. Well, G Plus doesn't know that, right? And so it just ranks him in the negative. And overall, the eye test will tell you he's been pretty decent, but also Seattle's kind of also you can kind of target, oh, Seattle's been kind of crap on the wings at times, and not at times, pretty consistently throughout this year. And I kind of chalk a lot of that up to the fact that he hasn't been able to be a consistent piece out there, and they've kind of just had a lot of turnover. And it's been one of my frustrations because I feel in general, it's something that Brian Schmetzer has been really good at in the past, is finding guys who have that one good talent, sticking them in that place where their talent shines, and then trying to cover up their weakness. And I think that good coaches do that. I think good managers do that, right? They put people in their work environments where they can be successful, and then they help mitigate those things that they're not good at from a skill perspective. And I think from our perspective, one of the things that we're trying to identify is find out what are those skills that they have, and trying to identify and piece out, piecemeal, what is their how good are they from a passing perspective, right? Because those passing numbers, it's hard to tell. You have to look at it in a more, with a fine tooth comb, right?
Yeah, and I think like we've had this discussion about like where MLS is as a league. The league is much more about what you can do than what you can't do.
Right.
At the top levels of the game, like a Champions League final or like whatever, that's a little bit different. Like the baseline is so good It's much more about like forcing you to things you cannot do. However, MLS is a growing league. The level gets higher and higher every year. But MLS is still in a place where like if you have one skill that you are so good at, we can worry about everything else later. Like Harris Medunjanin was a very useful defensive midfielder in this league for years and years and years, being able to pass and do nothing else. Nothing
cover
else. That guy,
cover like a six
Yeah.
foot five square inch of
Yeah.
grass.
I'm just
Yeah,
trying to
they-
imagine Medunjanin in energy drink Philly mode. It would not
yeah.
go well.
But think about that. Harris Medunjanin was so good at what he did that Jim Curtin was like, "You're gonna do all the passing and nothing else."
Well, and he
And
found a way to cover that up, right? He
yeah,
found guys.
we're gonna play diamond, and I'm gonna put three guys who just run around.
Yes.
And I think in the context of like running a good organization, like I will drop the Moneyball quote, the Jonah Hill character quote, where like baseball teams buy players, but you're not supposed to buy players. You're supposed to buy runs. In soccer, you're not buying players. You're buying goals, either conceded or stopped the other way. So like
Exactly.
you really should be thinking about it in terms of the skill sets you are buying to score goals or to stop goals.
Well, and you said it right, because I think too many people they go to score goals, right? Ours is to generate plus goals,
And this was the origin of something like goals added, is
right?
that there are a whole lot of things you do on the field that are not goals, but that reliably drive goals. Like if you as a player can pass the ball forward, you are increasing the probability that your team scores. And the fundamental unit of account, not to sound like Teodel, the fundamental currency is goals. Not goals scored. It is just goals. You don't have to do the scoring. And I think that viewpoint can drive a lot of winning in MLS.
Say
Ben,
absolute unit, and we're gonna get sued.
yeah, that's a trademark for the absolute unit of soccer is the goal. That's a trademark infringement. Ben, I'm curious, like you worked at a fairly analytical organization. Like, is that how people talk about this? Is that how people think about these things?
Oh gosh. I mean, that like the probability you're going to score a goal is the currency, if that's what you're talking about. But then you also have to like, I still think the biggest challenge of MLS is the math you have to do to get there, because you can't just buy all of your goals in one player. Like previous, current regime aside, the Rapids have a pretty terrible track record when it comes to signing designated players.
Yeah, Tim Howard being like
Yeah,
worse than his expected goals doesn't do it for you.
like, I mean, even before that, this goes back to like 2014 with like, Juan Ramirez and something like the only designated player we had that was worth speaking of before, like, it was like Kevin Doyle and Shkelz and Gashi, and that was it until,
My
I
boy
mean,
Kevin Doyle.
there's Nomley who was hurt. Like there's that could have been something, but it's so much money to spend for something that isn't going to necessarily come through. And you notice the shift. The DPs recently have been trading for Kevin Cabral on half as much money, but it occupies a DP slot. But you're still getting some value, even though Doyle, Matt Doyle will always talk about extra time. If he could put the ball in the net, he'd be playing in England. Like he wouldn't be in MLS. That's where you're trading one skill set, the putting the ball in the net, to someone else. Now it's Navahu and Mihailovic. So you have to like swap your skills, because you're never going to get it all in one player or another player at this point. And that's what I like about the Rapids roster right now, is you have intersecting pieces. You have wingers that are good at what you want your wingers to do, and maybe they don't have the cleanest touch on the ball, but if they're going to have the pace to get into the speed and have the wherewithal to put the ball where you need it to for the next play, you're going to be closer to the goals. That's the currency you're buying.
Gabby Torres erasure. That's all I'm gonna say.
Gabby Torres erased himself, but he's been good everywhere else.
He's been great everywhere else he's gone. He's been
Panama. I don't.
He's been the best player out of Panama for like a decade. Like he left, came back, and just continued to do great things.
It was inexplicable. I don't know.
Don't you dare slander Roman Torres. Harrison, I think that point is like relevant to you as well, where like when we think about the Sounders, the thing the Sounders have done really well historically is like they have put players in positions for their skill set to succeed, regardless of what their position is. Like Christian Roldan is a weird player. Like Christian Roldan as a regular old center midfielder is like not that good. He's fine. He's a good player, but he's not amazing. Nico Ladero as a regular number 10 is like fine, but not amazing. Alex Roldan was like out of the league until he became a fullback. Jordan Morris is a
Jordan
weird
Morris. Yeah.
Jordan Morris is a very talented player, but like there are many
He's a we-
worlds.
he's a weird he no no he's a weird winger. He's a
Yeah,
weird inverted winger that like essentially has a below average left foot but a high average above average right foot. And how do you figure that out, right?
so and I think the thing Seattle historically have done is like think of it like a recipe. The recipe to score a goal is we need this much passing and we need this much ball winning and we need this much off ball movement and we need this much whatever with this much dribbling. And like, okay, we're gonna get it from weird spots. Like we're gonna get a weird amount of ball progression out of Nuhu. We're gonna get some like useful stuff out of Jovan Jones so that Jordan Morris can go inside more. Ladero's gonna drift wide and Roldan's gonna fill his space inside. Like whatever. Um Wilburin's gonna come off the bench and save the game every time. But I think the current iteration of the Sounders, like I think the current iteration of the Sounders is a quite talented team. Like I would say the current iteration is more talented than some Seattle teams that have been much better than them. And I think part of it is like some of these players are good players, but the ratio of skill sets or the collection of talent, like the way the talent fits together, is poor. Like former host Ian, tweeted something that I thought was really telling on the weekend about like in games like this, I'd rather Jordan Morris just play as a winger because when he plays as a striker, he doesn't touch the ball. Or it might have not have been this weekend, it might have been the weekend before. And it's like, yeah, because you lack like passing ball progression in this iteration
Yeah.
of the team.
Well, especially with Roldan moved back to fullback, right?
So then you need to like then Morris has to play wide where
Hmm.
he can use his dribbling to progress the ball into the box. And that's how the ball is going to get to the striker. But when he plays as a striker, nobody can get the ball to him. And so I think like overall, to bring it full circle back to SKC so we can move on, like it's really hard to think about soccer that abstractly when you are like literally on the field with these players. Like I think it is really hard to take a step back and be like, what is the composition of our squad? What do we need? Where like what I can say this like when I'm working with players directly, like I am very focused on like what they cannot do. Like I'm very focused on this player can't do this player can't do that. Like so I'm gonna try and patch up all the holes I can. And I think in MLS, from the squad building perspective, like you have to take the step back and be like, what can they do? And do we have enough players who do that thing? Do we have enough of that thing that can get on the field?
It's kind of not to do another shout out to Moneyball, but kind of that Billy Bean of, oh, he doesn't talk with players.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's hard, man. Like it's really hard it's very, very difficult to coach a team and run recruitment. Like that's what university soccer is like you're running recruitment and coaching the team. And like it is impossibly difficult to convince someone to like move their whole life across the country to come play for you and then get a year in and be like,
It's not
dude, like
working.
you're not cutting it. Like I'm gonna go get somebody else. Like that's really hard. And it's much easier when you're not the person on the field. And I think that's where we'll leave that. Um, in the theme of different skill sets and fit, we wanted to have a little bit of fun because there's been lots of rumors going around MLS about transfers and stuff going on. And we're not the Daily Mail, so we're not going to talk about any specific rumors. We're going to make up our own rumors. So each of us has made a trade, a fake trade, we will vote if it's a realistic fake trade, if this trade could feasibly go through. And uh and we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. But these are fake trades. We think players that could benefit from another situation, teams that could benefit from a little change. Ben, I'm curious to hear yours. What is your fake trade?
So mine, I tried to go with teams that actually need to do something. I don't know if it's going to change their fortunes enough this season, but they need to get the ball rolling for next year. So I thought about Montreal's roster, and I noticed
Oh,
that Mason Toy has not been playing nearly as much as he has been in a couple of years. And I'm wondering if maybe he would enjoy a trip to St. Louis, where they could certainly use another attacker. And I think maybe like if I were St. Louis's GM, I would probably not pay more than 400,000 an allocation to make that happen. I don't even know what his salary is right now, but that seems like a fair trade to me. Like Montreal will need assets. They just need to rebuild at this point. And I mean, they need to hire people to do the rebuild, of course. But that seems like a good way to sort of flip someone who doesn't seem to have a place in the current lineup to a situation that might benefit him and try and get something to rebuild with.
I dig that. I thought when you said Montreal, you're going to say Sanusi Ibrahim, who's had like sneakily very good under the radar
Ooh.
metrics for like 2 years in a row now, and is a little bit younger. Mason Toy makes 500K and his contract is up at the end of the year, and I would be shocked if
Oh,
Montreal
that
hung on to him.
yeah. So yeah, that'd be even cheaper then. But
Exactly.
anything counts. Anything if for a contract running out. So like maybe
Yeah, it's 70.
1 to 200,
Oh yeah, I'm thinking 75.
75,
Damn,
anything though.
you probably get him for a song and a dance. Like, and
Mm-hmm.
that's not a bad idea, right? Like just having somebody just to help. I mean, they've kind of lost a little bit of a little momentum, and that probably, at least if nothing else, helps make that position a little bit more competitive at bare minimum, right? If you
I think that's
Mm-hmm.
a
I've
fun
seen the
trade.
Rapids do plenty of second half season trades like that. Just like they need a spot, we could use someone to just give a run. Let's see what happens. So
I mean, in his like limited career minutes, like he's played like 5,000 MLS minutes in like 7 or 8 seasons. Like he's a point 0.5 non-penalty XG plus XA guy. Like
yeah,
that's those
he's average. He's an average striker.
I mean that's like quite a bit better than average. Like those he's having a pretty
Mm-hmm.
crappy year this year, the last
Yeah,
2 seasons really, but that's more of a Montreal thing than a
yeah.
him thing, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Um I love that. That's a great one. Harrison, let's hear your trade.
So I kind of have a little bit of two. So I will say I think right now the one thing that Philadelphia could use a little bit of help with is defense. And I think that also DC United need a little bit of help on defense. While DC United like XG against isn't that bad, they're actually giving up way more goals than their actual. I think like 12. I think they're plus 12 over their expected goals against. So my idea was to align with a team like Chicago, who has Carlos Turan, very young, very decent, at least from net G plus last year over the last 2 years. He's shown some really positive signs. He is a plus G plus number right now. He's like 1.06 from an offensive perspective. I think he would do really well in either DC or Philadelphia. I think that that's a young type move that you pay 1.1 and maybe some sell on percentage as well. And it allows Chicago just to kind of deal with a little bit of their burden of how much they need to kind of go and repair some of that attack. So also, Philadelphia has some young players that don't necessarily have room. One specific person that I kind of highlighted was Chris Donovan, who's really interesting from a striker perspective. He's only 23. That somebody that could probably fit at Chicago, especially as they start rebuilding and everything. So something to think about.
Tehran's an interesting one because he's been at Chicago almost 4 years now, and his contract is up in one more year or two more
Mm-hmm.
years. And he's like quite good. Like I would expect that that would take a lot more than $1 million GAM. Like I would expect they're looking to sell outside of MLS.
Well, that's why I
But
said like holding on like 1.1, 1.2, and then you get a huge
it's
chunk. I mean,
possible.
maybe we are looking at Darlington Nagbe type like almost 2 million in TAM. But here's the deal: I don't think that I don't think he has a notoriety to demand that much. And then on top of that, I think really what Chicago is going to be worried about is the sell on amount, right? And so DC United at this point in time, that really kind of pushes them into that playoff picture, and it gives them that ability to where they say, hey, look, we're not a team known for selling off players. If it happens, it happens, and we'll give you a share of it. But really, what we want is him for the next year and a half to be a good defensive replacement and be our starting center back.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, like DC is interesting because DC are just they're like 16 goals behind their expected goal difference, and it's like not uh it's like misfortune. It's like an unusual number of own goals. It's like not even players playing bad, but I think they have a lot of room to add talent. Philly is an interesting one. That feels like I really try. So like I'll break into mine. I really wanted to find a striker to Philly. I was like, Philly are selling Carranza to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want to find who's the next Carranza, who's the next like scrap heap striker that they're gonna take from somebody that is gonna be really good. Like I thought about like would Philly try and get like DeAndre Kerr, who has really good underlines but doesn't play for
Oh,
TFC.
yeah.
Mhm.
That was one that came to mind, but I think TFC would say no unless it was like for a lot of money. And I like just couldn't really find another name who was interesting to me. And then I looked at goalkeeper because they're playing an academy kid and Andre Blake has been injured all year. Didn't really find that either. So I went the other conference and I was like, all right, who's bad and who I might want to sell on older salary? And the player that I found my way to is Paul Areola. Dallas are pretty bad. They just fired their coach. They historically have lots of good academy kids that they want to bring through. And Paul Areola makes a lot of money. And he's good, but he's not like amazing. So he's like and he makes a lot of money. So he makes max TAM. So he's kind of an awkward player to fit in. So I was like, all right, who would want like a good, hardworking vet, but like wouldn't care that he's actually not that good? And I looked at Portland. And I was like, all right, can I make a trade with Portland work where like Portland have a lot of vets. Like Portland are very much trying to win now with like Kamal and
Yeah.
Maxime Crepeau, and those guys. And so what I came out
Sure.
to was David Ayala, the defensive midfielder, who's like probably about an average DM, but he's 21, like worth a punt. He's also been in Portland for like a bit and like doesn't really play that much. At least as much as like he probably should. Like I think he's got like 15 90s across 3 seasons since joining from Estudiantes. And he makes like enough money that if you shift him, you can probably fit Areola in. So I said David Ayala and some cash for Paul Areola was my framework.
Yeah, I like that.
It's
Especially
interesting.
especially because Dallas really need to look for the future now. And I don't think I don't think Ariola would want to stick around for that. Like I think that was part of why he wanted out of DC at the time too. Like DC was about to hit a rebuild. It seemed like Dallas was on the upswing, so that trade sort of made sense for him to like because he was trying to make a an international roster, like sort of one last hurrah to at the time. So I feel like he's still at a late prime stage that any win now team would probably be a good fit for him.
Yeah, like Dallas are like Liam Fraser, who was like out of the league. He was playing like second division in Belgium, not getting games, has like 15 90s for them. And they have some like interesting like early peak repeat players like Martin Paz, the goalkeeper, is very decent. Peter Musa has like 9 goals and 2 assists already this season. He's a little bit ahead of his XG, but like there's something there. Um, like I just wonder if like guys like Omar and Leggett and Areola and Yaramendi, if they're just like, yeah, let's dump him and move on.
So I'm actually really interested about the question concerning goalkeepers. I love backup goalkeepers. And so I kind of this was my other one, and I just dropped it for the sake of time. But Stephen Cleveland is a backup at Austin, and he's shown to be really talented.
Mhm.
Seattle kind of took a pass on him because they had Andrew Thomas, and they had to choose one. Essentially, they were at a place where they had to choose one,
Well, and Stefan Cleveland, I think, aged out of homegrown deals, right?
Correct. He's age 30. He's hitting his prime. I think that he'd be fantastic either in DC or in a numerous amounts of other places. He's sitting right now at Austin. Austin's definitely kind of,
Stuver.
yeah, Stuver's
He's not
got
gonna get time.
Dude,
no.
Austin have like okay, I'm gonna give you an impromptu trivia question. Brad Stuber is obviously Austin's starter. They have and he makes $500,000 a year. They have two backups. How old do you think they are? Stephen Cleveland is 30. How old do you think the third choice goalkeeper is?
I don't even know who the other one is.
It's Matt Bersano is his name.
Persona. That
I've
doesn't ring a
never heard
bell.
of that name.
After I just said I
28.
love backup goalkeepers.
So-
no
so-
idea.
You don't know your third strings? Come on.
So
No, I know.
Matt Bersano was like a Quakes guy. He also played Sounders too in 2016, apparently. Matt
Oh.
Bersano is 30. He also makes $150,000 a year, and Stefan Cleveland makes $200,000 a year. So you have $900,000 budgeted towards your goalkeeper position. Why? And only 500 of it is your starter. Why?
When you could probably trade one of those and then draft
Mhm.
somebody for
Yeah.
a
Why? Like,
quarter.
what are you,
Yep.
Austin? What are you doing? Stephen Cleveland, by the way, if you remember do you remember the expansion draft episode we did, Harrison? Like with
Yes.
like for St. Louis, Stephen Cleveland was like the big
Yeah.
dilemma for all of us was, are you going to take Stephen Cleveland or Jackson Reagan? And you're definitely going to take one of them. And St. Louis took neither.
I gotta think that there was a deal done somewhere. I have to think that there was some black powder deals that were done somewhere. I really feel like that's
Incredible. Well, we just got the 10-minute warning on Zoom, so we're gonna fire out some trivia questions. There's only 5 this week, and
Lightning round.
I'm putting timers on because we are not taking this to a third Zoom. Gentlemen, are you ready?
Yes.
Harrison, I'm gonna give it to you because you sound like you need a break from studying. So Harrison, 1 to 5, what question do you want?
4.
Alrighty. CONCACAF participating in Copa America this year means lots of MLSers, including 1 Next Pro player. Over under. So you can either set the line or ask Ben to set the line for you. Over under, how many MLS players are on a squad for Copa America?
Oof.
You can set the line or you can ask Ben to set it for you.
I'm gonna set the line at 30.
It's a good guess.
line.
Ben, over under 30. I can tell you it is not exactly 30. Otherwise, Harrison would have
That's a
gotten
good
40
line.
points.
I'm gonna go over. Like, this is close. I'm gonna go over.
It is correctly over. It's 40. It's 41. I
I
believe
almost said it
Okay.
at 40.
I thought
I
it was-
almost said it at 40, and I thought that was too high.
if you said it at 40, I would have given you the exact because there are 40 MLSers and 1 MLS Next Pro player. Yeah, Canada have like 14 MLS players, which is a
Mhm.
huge chunk. Of
yeah.
Well, Ben takes a 1-0 lead as the Steeler. Ben, what
Good
question
job.
do you want?
I'll do 5.
Alrighty. Which player to have played in MLS has the most appearances in Copa America history? There are 2 players who have both played 27 games. Name either of them.
I mean, does Messi count?
Oh yes, this question should say other than Messi.
Okay,
because
other than
has
Messi.
Messi has the
Oh.
most games in Copa America history. Sorry.
Okay. Ooh. So
That's
this is a tough one. All right, I'm gonna try and keep this fast. I'm gonna not go CONCACAF just because they haven't been in it enough.
I can confirm that it is not a CONCACAF player.
Let's say, oh God, whatever. Barcelona.
It's good. That's a good guess. I don't know how many Argentina appearances he has, but it's not. It is
Okay.
not Berlusconi, the crewman. Harrison, can you steal?
I really want to, but like off the top of my head, like I can't think of. This Scalotto was a great call. I can't think of anybody off the top of my head for Argentina.
You're both going to regret this. It's not necessarily Argentina. It's for any country.
I was wondering if it was going to be Colombia. Is it Valderrama?
Valderrama is number one,
Oh, nice.
and Yoshi Yotun for Peru is
Oh
second.
wow, okay.
But they
I
both
didn't
have
know
Yoshi
he's
24.
had
Yotun.
so many
I didn't think that.
appearances.
Yeah,
Wow.
he wouldn't have even been in like the
Yeah.
top.
I would have
Yeah.
been thinking like first 10 years of the league for sure.
They both
Yeah.
have 27 appearances in Copa America, which is like fifth, tied for fifth all time. And yes, as you said, Ben Messi is first overall with like 35. All right, Harrison, you're back up. You can take the lead 2-1, 1-3.
One.
Copa America is, of course, the continental competition for CONMEBOL, but sometimes outside federation participants turn up, like this year. I want you guys to take turns naming countries to have played in Copa America that are not part of CONMEBOL. The first one to get one wrong loses, and the other person takes the points. So countries that have ever historically played in Copa America but are not part of CONMEBOL.
I'll go with the United States.
That is correct, Ben.
Mexico.
Also correct, Harrison.
Canada.
Also correct.
Costa Rica.
Also correct. And now they start trying to think who's in the tournament this year.
I'm not thinking about who's in this year. I've actually thought about past. This is weird. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to zing it, and I'm probably wrong. So that's okay. Japan?
Japan have been in it in 2016 in the Centenario, I believe.
Australia.
It's a good guess. They have not taken place in Copa America. The other teams you
Korea?
missed. No, Haiti, Honduras, Jamaica, Panama, and Qatar.
I was wondering
Honduras.
about Qatar.
I was wondering about Honduras. I wasn't sure. I was sitting on them, but I wasn't sure.
I need to make sure that Ben is actually incorrect, but I'm pretty sure because I looked at it earlier.
We could just go with it. We don't need to double check
Harrison,
that.
2-1 lead. Ben, you can take a 3-2 lead.
Oh, what's
Two
left?
or three. Two or three. The US's last and best ever Copa America appearance was 2016, the Centenario, which they also hosted. They came fourth. They lost to Colombia 1-0 in the third place game. With 3 goals in that tournament, who was their leading scorer?
I think it was Christian Pulisic.
I believe that's the first tournament he played in, but he did not. He was not their leading scorer. It's a good guess.
Okay.
Harrison, can you steal?
I believe it was Clint Dempsey.
That is factual. Clint Dempsey, 3 goals. He scored the opener and he scored the winner against Ecuador. Clint Dempsey. Deuce.
Oh, deuce.
I believe that was the year he joined the Sounders, or the year after he joined the Sounders as well.
Yeah.
All right, Harrison, you can seal the deal. You're up to a correct answer. Actually, I think you win automatically because Ben can't take 2 points here. So you've won, but it's for fun. So the OG Copa America trophy is over 100 years old. It was made by like an Argentine jeweler in 1916, which I think is cool. But starting in 1997, CONMEBOL started giving out a trophy to the runner-up of the competition. It's much smaller. It's made of silver. And it features the flag of which nation on the side?
I gotta think it's Brazil because I feel like that's a subtle dig that Argentina would do. Is it true?
It's a good guess. It's a good guess, but no, it is not
Okay.
Brazil. Ben, can you steal for honor?
Is it Bolivia?
It is Bolivia. It is the Copa de Bolivia. Bolivia were the
Simon de
19...
Bolivar. Oh, is it actually because they won something?
No, they were the hosts in 1997,
Okay,
and they decided we're going to make our own trophy. Alrighty, wow, Harrison, you're like on a streak this year. You must be so happy that Ian's no longer
here. You've got some fresh meat to go.
I even put my I don't know if you saw me. I put my hands up a couple times.
Incredible.
You know, I'm showing. I ain't cheating. This ain't
incredible.
Yeah.
Alrighty, well, that's gonna wrap up our show today. We went a little bit long, but we got into the weeds about some fun stuff, I think. That's it from us. Hope you all enjoyed listening. As always, if you want to support the show, if you want to support ASA, we're thinking about doing some things that might cost some money coming up in the ASA space. So if you want to support the website, if you want to support the podcast, check out the ASA Patreon. It's one tier, $5 a month. You get into the patron Discord. There's all sorts of fun chat going on through the games. You can ask questions about ASA if there's things you don't know about the site or want to know about the site or want to see more of. It's a really great place to get a hold of people and to get your questions answered. We heard from there's a few people on Teams who are in there. Somebody reached out to answer one of our questions, talking about how they use G plus, which was something we talked about. They use G plus to validate their own possession value models, which is something we talked about. So check it out if you want to support the show. Anyways, that's all from us. We'll see you all in 2 weeks, and as always, enjoy the soccer.
And then at this point, what does a team have to do to turn things